The Romans believed young people should be taught to read and write, and many probably were, to a fairly basic level. But educating a child took several years, so only the rich could afford to put their children all the way through the Roman schooling system. This small boy is one of the fortunate few to be taught by a professional teacher, called a ludi magister or literator. It was not unusual for these teachers to be slaves.
The best estimates indicate that roughly 20% of Roman men could read and write. So that means 80% of the population couldn't. And women, girls, were much less educated than boys. So education was primarily a method of making people different. It still is. The more education you get, the more money you're likely to earn. And that was the same in Roman times as well. And primary education, small education, learning how to read and write, that accounts for most of education. That's from boys and girls, I think, probably some girls, from 7 to 11. And perhaps that was all that most kids at school got.
Parents who couldn't afford the school fees often taught their children at home. Fathers took on the responsibility for their sons' education. Some girls were also taught at home, but most of them missed out on education and were taught practical housekeeping duties instead. Although there are examples of women who were educated and who played their part in the public life of Pompeii. Boys that went to school were always accompanied by a senior slave called a paedagogus. The paedagogus's sole job was to look after his young master, making sure he arrived at school on time and behaved properly when he was there. A less important slave carried the books and walked a few paces behind the schoolboy.
Good morning, sir.
When a Roman boy got up, he immediately said to his slave who was sleeping in his bedroom, "Bring me water, bring me my clothes, draw the curtains, do it quickly, do it fast." One of the things you learned as a young Roman was how to be a master, if you were of the master class.
I don't want to be late for school.
This line is taken from an ancient Roman textbook describing a young boy keenly rising before dawn to be in time for school. But although the pupils were privileged, discipline was firmly enforced, and the threat of beatings was never far away.
Do it again. Now, what does that say?
Work hard, boy, or you will be beaten.
We know that one of the most common writing materials was wax, the letters scratched on the surface with a stylus. The National Museum in Naples has fragments of wall paintings showing other writing implements, papyrus, a reed pen, as well as a stylus and beeswax tablets. Ink was made from soot, or the ink sacs of squid and octopus.
They all fell silent and fixed their eyes.
Learning to read and write was the first important step. Without literacy, the top jobs, the law, military service and the government remained closed. Literacy brought more than education to Romans. It gave them influence and power.
Today, we learn a lot of technical subjects. We have to prepare ourselves for a wide variety of possible occupations. And we have examinations. In other words, we have an open competition among ourselves as to who are the best people. Rome was a competitive society, always competitive. But who won wasn't really decided by overt forms of examination. It was decided really by who you were, what friends you had, what patrons you had. Very much it was status dominated. You could fight your way up from the bottom, but it was a hell of a long way and extremely difficult.